Good morning, everyone. God bless you, and thank you for participating in this International Heart Center broadcast on this Saturday morning, the 28th of January, 2017. Today's message is from Saint Germain, and at the request of Runa Hagen, who will broadcast later today from Norway on behalf of Scandinavia, Saint Germain would address us on the subject of NATO. NATO, as we know, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it was founded on April 4th, 1949. April 4th happens to be Al Moria's birthday, which is interesting. And NATO is a formal alliance between the territories of North America and Europe. And from its inception, its main purpose was to defend each of the nations collectively and individually from the possibility of a communist Soviet incursion or their attempt to control those nations. Originally, NATO had 12 members. Now there, I believe, are 28 member nations: United States, Turkey, Germany, Poland, France, United Kingdom, Italy, Canada, Norway, Belgium, Spain, Greece, Bulgaria, Estonia, Iceland, Portugal, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Albania, Hungary, Latvia, Luxembourg, Romania, Slovakia, Denmark, Croatia, Slovenia, and the Netherlands or Holland. The United States underwrites about 3/4 of the military costs of defending Europe, which is considerable. And Donald Trump has recently made statements to the effect that many of these member nations are not doing their part and providing the 2% of their gross national product toward the military or defense purposes. And so he's made some statements that are definitely alarming to some about this alliance. I'd like to share with you what General Eisenhower said, who was the first Supreme Commander of NATO in February of 1951. He said, "If in 10 years all American troops stationed in Europe for national defense purposes have not been returned to the United States, then this whole project will have failed." Very interesting. Now, I will weave some of Saint Germain's comments as he overshines me through what comes next, because NATO is a very complex situation, and as is the European Union and other alliances of countries in Europe, some economic, and this one primarily for defense or military purposes. His comments are that the original intent was to safeguard freedom in especially Western Europe at that time by the powers of the West that could, in effect, counteract the threat of world communism as it sought to spread throughout the world. The issue, as I see it from Saint Germain, is that when you establish a large military-based organization for a certain purpose, and then, for instance, the Soviet Union collapsed in the 1980s, what then becomes the mission of that organization? When you establish a very large movement and bureaucracy, it tends to self-fulfill itself in a way, in a means that then becomes a juggernaut, and the people involved, the leadership involved, seek other ways of justifying its existence. Pat Buchanan wrote an interesting article that was published in Human Events recently where he understands Donald Trump's sharing on this subject, and that it becomes very problematic when, especially the United States, spends much of its resources to defend other nations, ostensibly for the purpose of defending freedom, and yet who has really the reins of power in NATO now? It's centered in Brussels, and we know that a lot is going on in Belgium with the European Union that is not always to the benefit of true political and economic freedom of the peoples throughout Europe. So a giant bureaucracy, as any giant government complex, becomes a means to an end, and the ends don't always justify the means that are taken within a bureaucracy of this magnitude for the freedom and enlightenment and security, the true security of all peoples within these nations. So forces of darkness have entered into NATO. NATO has wielded its powers occasionally throughout the world through its alliance, especially in Libya more recently, where some nations came in and bombed Libya, and we've seen the results of that in the long term, which have not been good. They sought to take out a dictator, Gaddafi, and what now has resulted is worse. It's a very complex situation. Remember, Saint Germain reminds us that he was attempting to create a United States of Europe before the French Revolution. Had he been successful and had the leaders of various nations listened to the great master, there could be the type of relationship among all the peoples of Europe that would have resulted in the type of alliance and unity that could be similar to what we have in the United States, yet in this case among many nations rather than just individual states. And there could be smooth and free trade, communication among all the languages and the peoples in a way that is very positive and dynamic rather than what has resulted in the economic alliance through the European Union, which has been problematic for some nations especially. Now, what are the solutions to the current problems? Of course, we always begin with prayer, meditation, and the emanation of light. And in this case, Saint Germain says, for the highest level of leadership, those light bearers in positions of authority who will work for the common good of all peoples, including the peoples of Russia and other nations. Russia should not be seen now so much as an enemy of the West because the Soviet Union was dissolved and communism is not rearing its head as it had from its beginnings in 1917 all the way through the 80s and the way it did, and therefore fear has to be overcome through righteousness, through right decision, through spiritual alliances. When the peoples of the Western nations in Western Europe and now in Central and even Eastern Europe align themselves with God and work for the light, there should be no fear, and that light itself is the positive, proactive force of protection, beingness, and the dynamic that seals the nations and their peoples in the light of the presence. So you always have these dynamics of individuals who are put in positions of authority, who are working for a collective, and yet what is the end result of that collective? If NATO and if the European Union have been co-opted by certain globalist powers and leaders and influences, especially the moneyed interests of those who are behind the Trilateral Commission and other nefarious movements and organizations, then you see a corrosion of the original intent and a stepping into a purpose that is not in alignment always with the will of God. The president met with Theresa May yesterday in the White House, the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and she basically stated that President Trump would support NATO. I think it's her desire for President Trump to do this because of his past statements. We shall see what this new administration actually does in terms of wielding its influence to demand greater economic support from all of the nations of NATO, and whether we will withdraw some of our financial support and what that will mean for NATO. Now we know that in addition to this statement from General Eisenhower about this, if in 10 years all American troops stationed in Europe have not been returned to the United States, the whole project will have failed. We know he also warned, as he was leaving office, of the military-industrial complex that was growing and was a juggernaut, and that even he, as the President of the United States, could not contain because of all of the powers that be were involved, and really the machinations of this military-industrial complex. So we see the warning of a righteous president to America and ultimately to the world, and yet NATO has continued on. It's grown. More nations are now a part of it. There was a very intense situation within the last few years where NATO troops were sent to the Far East on the borders of the nation of Ukraine because of the move of Russia. And yet, if you study the history of Russia in that region, you see that there were other factors at play, and this has almost led to World War III. So the previous administration, the Obama administration, authorized this move and sanctioned it through NATO. And of course, it's been very tenuous in recent months and years. And what we do not desire, of course, is another world war. What to do now? For us light bearers, of course, pray. Visualize the light. Participate with Runa when he leads these Saturday sessions where we saturate Europe in crystal light or rainbow light, violet light. We name all the nations. Many of the nations of Europe are a part of NATO now, including some that were originally part of the Warsaw Pact, which was the counter to NATO early on. So freedom has spread throughout some of the nations of Eastern Europe, some of the former Soviet republics, including, as you heard, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. and of course, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Slovenia, Hungary, these nations, and Poland, of course, which is one of the most phenomenal nations in terms of supporting freedom because of all that's transpired in their history. So we use the violet light, the rainbow light, and the crystal light to bathe these nations in divine light and energy so that right decisions are made by leaders both within NATO, the European Union, and the individual nations, so that the divine alchemy of true freedom may manifest. And I don't believe that we in the West always know what is really happening, because typically the powers that be wield their influence through their moneyed interests, through the banks, the international banks, and through the banking houses, and through their multinational corporations that they control, to try to control resources, especially natural resources. And then we see the ultimate effects, that the common people are hurt. The earth itself is raped, and we do not see true brother, sisterhood, and peace and divine progress manifesting. When we utilize the sacred tools and resources that we have of the violet light, the violet laser light specifically, and pinpoint accuracy, focus it into every situation, when we name the players, when we name these countries, we name the Supreme Commander, we name the General Secretary of NATO, and we see God and God's will manifesting through them, then we pray that the highest choices will be made. The right types of alliances will be pursued and manifest. Now, far be it from me as a messenger of the Ascended Masters to get too much more into this dynamic in terms of the history, the politics of it, because we are working primarily at a spiritual level to give the Ascended Masters, who know everything, the energy so that they can act. So the K-17 Encyclopedia, Lanello, the legions of Archangel Michael, the legions of deliverance, can go forth and take command of any situation before it becomes volatile to the point of erupting into war. Our spiritual work, our focus, is to anchor that light and to build huge resources and pools and reservoirs of light in the etheric octaves through our prayers and decrees, our meditation practice, so that the Ascended Masters, at any point, the Great White Brotherhood, through many of their councils, can utilize those energies to offset the strategies of darkness. The Divine Director is key in this, as we know, overshining Europe, and he is there day after day, I can assure you, and Saint Germain says, to help hold that balance. And it is interesting that his retreat and that of Saint Germain, or at least one of them, is over Transylvania, Romania, in the eastern part of Europe, to blaze forth that light of freedom there, to safeguard the light of freedom. We know Bulgaria has an ancient history of light through the Great White Brotherhood and their reach in ancient times through that region. So Bulgaria, Romania, very close to each other. These are key countries and emanating great, great light to offset the darkness. There are many light bearers, Saint Germain says, in Hungary, and Hungary right now as a whole is attempting to safeguard freedom. We know what happened in 1956, the year I was born, with the revolution going on there, and then the tanks from Russia coming in and squelching that and killing many people. So the West has not always come to the aid, and NATO has not come to the aid of freedom in certain situations, and it's still at times a very volatile and tense time when we can uh, use the legions of light and the Archangel Michael and the hosts of the Lord to go in there and take command. Part of the purpose of our fiats, what we know of this sacred science of invocation through the giving of fiats, is to kind of lower the spiritual boom of heaven at any given time so that God's will can be implemented immediately with lightning speed. So when you read of a situation, when you are aware of circumstances through your connections or through reading the news and the media of problems, please go into action. Close your eyes. See the legions of light going forth. Pray to Mother Mary to save the children and the families, communities, neighborhoods, and nations, because when war occurs, the brunt of that war often manifests in the neighborhoods of the light bearers, the common people, the innocent people, and these are the ravages of war. War is hell. War is the unleashing of the forces of hell and of darkness. And so at all costs, we attempt to prevent war because we know once the bombs start being unloaded, it's a terrible situation. We know what happened in Kosovo, in Croatia, in Slovenia, Slovakia, and that region. And many movies have been shared about what the horrors of the mass murders, and this is what we try to avoid. We call upon the great hosts of light to bind the mass entities of war, of destruction, of horror and terror, and mass murder. We have to use every resource at hand to invoke that light and to give the authority of the masters to act before things become embroiled to the point where they end up in a great war. And we've seen what's happened in Syria. And now the mass emigration of people out of Syria into Europe, to the West, and the taxing of these nations, their economies, their societies, by this mass influx. And by the way, Saint Germain says this was all choreographed by the Dark Ones. They knew that this would happen. This is why they armed ISIS, even through the CIA, in covert ways. And the powers that be, the powers that were, are still attempting to co-opt these individuals and use the forces of darkness to further their strategies. So Saint Germain is showing me now in a retreat of the Universal White Brotherhood what we would kind of term a war map, but it is really not a war map. It's the globe of the earth and certain nations and areas highlighted that are hot spots that the masters are constantly using our prayers for to prevent greater darkness from occurring and the killing of innocent lives. There are many hot spots around the world, the Middle East and of course part of Eastern Europe, but especially the Middle East, Pakistan, India, and these hot spots are constantly receiving an infusion of light and divine grace through the prayers of the righteous of all religions, of all faiths, and the light bearers in all nations. And it's like these hot spots, hell is trying to erupt through them. And our job is to like hold our finger in the dike so that hell cannot erupt into them and fulfill its purpose through unrighteous people and ignorant people and people who have forgotten God. So when we breathe the breath of the Holy Spirit through our beings, when we live in the integrity of love, when we are in a peaceable state in our own harmonic inner core, and we emanate love and light, fellowship, brother, sisterhood, peace, these energies are an unguent to and upon those hot spots. They are absolutely essential to mitigate these potential eruptions of the astral plane into the physical plane. And so our calls to Archangel Michael, El Moria, the Divine Director, Hercules, are all very essential, and Saint Germain highlights, if you knew who Arcturus is, you would sing his songs more often. I'm glad that we sing Song 38 more, that we sing and give our prayers to Arcturus, because Arcturus is a key for the current time to transmute this great darkness that could erupt. And so for a time we were giving these calls to Arcturus every day, like 33 calls to Arcturus. Saint Germain is showing me that it would be a great opportunity now, especially in this time when in the United States things are very tenuous with the current administration and the opposition to its new policies and what it is doing, to mitigate and to mollify all of the energy that's manifesting here in the United States and around the world, the fear of people, their concern about what this administration would do. So we can start a 99-day vigil giving our songs and prayers to Arcturus to absolutely transmute the cause and core of this darkness. And this 99-day vigil, at least give the Arcturus prayer 9 times, and you can sing it as part of those 9 times. We have the singing version of it. And please give Song 38 liberally and regularly in most, if not all, of our services. This is a very powerful song. And use Arcturus, Saint Germain says, to handle NATO. Arcturus has the authority and the power, if we give Arcturus and Victoria that light energy, to take command of NATO, take command of the European Union, take command of all the shifts that are occurring now, the changes that are transpiring everywhere. And if we work with the Elohim, Arcturus, and Victoria to do this work, we will see the right, the positive, the best changes and transformations occurring. Because God is great, the Ascended Masters and the Elohim know what is happening, what is at stake. They will continue to reveal to our higher minds their strategies, their vision for the future, the dynamics of what is transpiring in this, I guess we could call it a violet laser light peace room, or a strategy room, violet strategy room, we could call it. The violet, well, he's saying New Age, the New Era strategy, Ascended Master strategy room. The New Age Ascended Master strategy room. Or the Ascended Masters New Age strategy room. That's it. The Ascended Masters New Age strategy room. And one of the primary places where these are worked out is in Romania, above Transylvania, in that sacred retreat. And the reason why these meetings are held there is to safeguard this light of freedom. And of course, the Divine Director is very involved in all of this, Saint Germain says. So that is the crux of the message, and I'd like us to maybe complete our session today by again singing song number 38 and seeing cosmic rivers of light going forth through all of these nations of Europe and Asia and the Middle East, and transforming everything in light, and bringing forth the most beautiful, beautiful new blossoms of spiritual grace, to just turn the weapons of war into plowshares again, and to safeguard freedom, liberty, justice, equality for all, for every person of every nation. So eventually we will not have nations at all. We will have a one world, but it will be a one world of peace, of true ascended master, liberated enlightenment and freedom, not a one world order of darkness. So let's visualize this as we sing this song. And thank you, Boyd, for facilitating this service today. God bless.